Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 4 of Citadel. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, we are picking up with Nadia and Mason breaking into the black site facility and rescuing Carter. Because I thought maybe I know the whole point was let's go rescue Carter, but I was kind of wondering whether or not Dahlia, she had talked about breaking him, but we see that he is kind of broken, broke him for information. I guess in my head I thought she made him flip as well, but it was no, just broke him enough to get some information. But maybe there is some element of, oh no, he's also been turned as well, but why go through the trouble of locking him up? Not unless that's a ploy to get, because you think, at this point they thought Citadel was all wiped out, so makes you wonder why else would they keep Carter around all this time. Maybe I guess they felt like he's someone they keep pulling information from over these past 8 years type of situation. Well, it wasn't even 8 years, because didn't Carter only get caught, his last message was from a few months ago, so he's been on a run the entire time. Once again, we are only picking up little bits and pieces here and there about some of the Citadel agents. We know most of them are dead, but we don't know which ones are still out there. For example, Grace, we don't know if she's still out there or not. Either way, that whole sequence, obviously, once again, I do really love the action sequences in the show. I think it's so interesting, and I think this speaks volumes. I think Nadia's given a little bit of training to Mason, but not enough, because obviously she got into the nitty-gritty of it. She got into some close quarters combat. He's just sticking to guns and stuff because a lot of his training isn't there. There's probably some instinctual stuff that he can handle himself a little bit with a gun. He's kind of had to use one post losing his memories, but other than that, he isn't the same agent. But Nadia's getting in there, close quarters, shooting people, and you just see Mason kind of being support and secondary, even to the point that she was yo, cover me. She's well, I guess I'll cover you, because she's fighting home dude. That knife shit was pretty slick, which she was she sliced one dude's throat, his knife is in the air, she jumps and kicks it into that lady's neck. It's that was pretty dope, because he was batting into a corner, he was out of ammo, and he wasn't really about to try and close quarter combat this situation. He could have done a lot. Even she ran out of ammo and ended up throwing her gun as a means of kind of closing the distance, and also disorientating her opponent before. And so I think that kind of speaks volumes about where Mason is, or Kyle is, when it comes to all of this. He's still he's not the top tier agent. We've also seen him in that, in the first episode, what it was like for him, when he can get into that nitty gritty close quarters. But I think it speaks volumes about how Kyle did everything he could to avoid that. But they end up finding Carter, and we get flashbacks to 10 years ago. Obviously, everything between Nadia and continuing a little bit with the Nadia and Mason of it all, of the thing of yes, she's had multiple lovers, she's brought people to Paris and stuff like that too, but Mason's in the top 5. He's oh, how long did they last? It's nothing ever really lasts. It makes sense. It's the spy world. You can't let yourself, it's probably a combination of it being the spy world, but also we don't know a lot about Nadia. There could be just reasons in her own life that she feels the need to separate. For one, maybe it's just any good spy is separating your personal with business. Maybe when it comes to the spyhood, nothing's right fully over personal, because even Mason was right, little by little I can tell you're scared. And she's what am I scared of? It's you're scared that I'm seeing through all the masks. And he's there are a lot of masks you put on. And she's why would I be scared of that? And he's I don't know yet. But maybe she is afraid of someone seeing the real her, maybe because she's afraid they won't like what they see, type of situation. So, but once again, it also gets muddied, because that's that spy thing of gotta keep things fun and nothing gets too serious. But ultimately, Nadia, that makes the Abby thing even more interesting. And obviously it's pretty jacked up for Enders, that it's cool, my Burial is married to one of my arch nemesis, that's stings. But now it's Nadia and Mason had their thing. Now Celeste is her real name. Burial is her fake name she used to go undercover to get close to Anders. But yeah, for Nadia, Celeste is like a really good friend, owes her life and everything. So it's like, right, I'm bringing her in. I convinced Grace to bring her in as a tier 1 agent. So they're having her go undercover to get close to Anders. I think it's so interesting because we hadn't really brought up the distinction between Anders and Davik. Like, obviously, it's like, no twins are exactly the same, which I think it's so interesting that Celeste is in the same boat. She's a twin herself. She has a twin brother. She's the oldest, I believe, because it's like by like 30 some seconds or whatever. Either way, we learned that Anders is the brain of the operation. Like, a lot of the technological stuff, he handles it. Davik's still like more brutal, like, I'm the muscle of this operation. But it doesn't shy away from the fact that I think maybe that's even more so why Anders was so easily swayed by what Bernard said last episode, especially about Burrell, because he hasn't seen her in all these years. He didn't know whatever happened to her. But also, I think it's the element of he's the one that leads a little more with his heart because he's the brains, whereas his brother's the muscle. So he's like he's a lot more ruthless and a lot more cutthroat than his brother. But they both can be. They are criminals. I mean, because even Mason was like, he is the more danger of that Anders is the more dangerous of the siblings. So. But I love the whole situation of like, this is about an Oz key. This is a technology that Anders is making that if he's able to access it, he'll be able to access the infrastructure of any city. Like, you'd be able to hijack every element of a city from like, I think anything on like some grid or infrastructure type of thing. Like, the entire city could be like taken for ransom. And Anders is getting closer to finishing it, and so she has to go undercover. Nadia is all about like, oh yeah, the good thing about going undercover, a good spy is a good liar. But Mason's like, no, being a good liar isn't what makes a good spy. It makes a good undercover. It's telling the truth. Basically, you do have to lie, but not to the person you're lying to. You have to lie to yourself. Your lie has to be so good. You have to believe this lie so much that it becomes the truth. It's like, don't try and get Anders to fall in love with you. You find something about him that you can fall in love with. So I was like, I think that's so interesting because I always hear that the best lies always are birthed from truth. Yes, there's lies mixed in, but what makes a perfect and good lie is that there are elements of truth in it, because that also makes it easier to keep your story straight. Like, you don't have to keep up making up details. It's like, if you keep it as close to the truth as possible and fudge some details, it'll work in your favor. That will make a lie stronger. At least that's kind of always been my interpretation of it, and I feel like that is kind of amplified and represented in this particular circumstance. But she was deep undercover for a while because it is that thing of you lose yourself, because Mason was like, you have to look in the mirror and see someone completely different. Celeste Graham disappears. You have to be Burrell, and that's who she became. But it's like, yeah, when you've lived that for over 3 months, because she was undercover for wasn't it 100 and some days or something like that? Because at one point it had been a few weeks, and then that eventually led to 3 months. But the problem was she stopped getting in contact with Mason. Mason was supposed to be her lifeline to be like, hey, check in every week. I can ground you and remind you what this is all about. Don't get caught up in this thing that you believe is the truth so much. Because now this also adds context to what Bernard was saying last episode about everything you know is a lie. It's because he didn't know Burrell was a Citadel agent. Everything you knew, everything you fell in love with her about wasn't real, Which is so ironic now that Mason ended up marrying someone who isn't who. I mean, to be fair, they met because neither one of them has any memory of who they were, but it's still ironic. They are so heavily tied that we find, jumping ahead a little bit, Mason's the one that took her memory away, and so for them to find each other, is that a complete another accident? I feel like Bernard probably had to have played some role in setting that up. In some case of keeping them close enough to each other, I have no idea. But after going undercover, it seemed like at the very least, Celeste was going to do what she was supposed to do. So she eventually switches out the Oz key that Anders was making and with a fake, but Davik caught her, and it led to a tussle. At the same time, because Mason was worried like things could have gone wrong, we haven't gotten in contact with Celeste for so long. Nadia's like, no, let her stay. Let her do this. She's got this. He sends it in a team, but by the time they get there, like some fighting went down. There was some losses. Davik, she had knocked Davik out, but apparently he got away. He did see where she hid her purse, so he knew exactly what was in it. He saw her take the Oz key. But the problem is, when they got there, Davik was gone, and so was the Oz key. Mason is pushing that it was Celeste that was behind it. Obviously, she didn't. I mean, we never got her fully explaining everything from her perspective. We got some of the details, but it's like, yeah, I knocked Davik out. It's like, yeah, Davik like busted you. Granted, your cover still would have been fine. You probably would have had to do something with Davik, but that wouldn't have been a permanent enough situation. Like, eventually Anders would be like, yo, where my brother at? Like, you know, so it wouldn't have given you much time. But I guess if you could at least like arrest Davik and remove him from the situation, her cover still would have been fine. Because Davik doesn't know she's a Citadel agent. He just knows you up to something weird. Like, he didn't trust her. He already had like a bad feeling about her regardless. And he's just like, oh, Anders is going to be so sad knowing something happened to you when I have to tell him like, oh yeah, I had to do something to you because you're a thief. Once again, it could be just like, oh, you're trying to like play us and steal from us, not necessarily knowing that she's a Citadel agent. So, but Mason is pushing her because he believes that she stole it. It's like, oh, you say you put it in your purse and it just happens to disappear. Oh, Davik's going too. They think he in particular believes that she got so deep undercover that she kind of lost the way. I mean, true. Actually, no. I actually take that back. He thinks her actual personal life is the reason why she might do this, because it turns out her brother's in severe debt, 6 figures type of debt. And there are very bad people after him, so she might be tempted to try and sell off the Oz key to pay off his debt to save his life. I mean, because Mason had talked to Nadia about it. It's like, we both know how crazy and stupid like people will do things that are crazy and stupid for the people they love, which is ironic considering, like, what are you doing right now? You're doing all this for the people you love, ironically being one of the people that I love, because it's a whole thing of like, oh, Nadia told me I was going to love you, and Celeste is like, no, you're going to hate me, because he had said the same thing, and it's like, that, once again, the beautiful irony behind it all now. But that's also the interesting thing. Davik and Anders have obviously been around each other these past, like, 10 years. So why hasn't Davik said anything? Once again, maybe it is still like her cover is held. Like, it's like, hey, I don't know that she's... Because Davik doesn't know that she's a Citadel agent, only that she tried to rob him. So it's like, he's been trying to find Burial ever since, because he probably wants to get her side of things, not knowing who she really is. Because from what we got conversation-wise the last episode, Bernard didn't tell him everything, just that, like, hey, her new name's Abby and she's in love with Mason Kane. Because maybe it's a thing of, like, because that also implies, like, hey, she's this person and she does, because neither Anders nor Davik know that Mason has no memory, that he's Kyle now. And they don't know the same thing in her case. I mean, once again, they don't know that she was undercover, that there was never any Burial, but Burial, that fake identity is gone. So is who she really was, because Mason suggested that they backstop her. And it's so interesting to know, like, at this point 10 years ago, that was still relative new technology, that they didn't know what the aftermath of it was. That she actually had to go to it helps sell the lie that they were just helping her, like, restructure her eyes and her fingertips so she could be legitimately, like, a different person, so that make it harder for Davik to find her. But she went to Mexico City for the procedure that would, backstop her memory. So, like, I don't know if that was fully just for that cover. Because, I mean, 8 years ago, like 2 years later, the backstop technology had advanced to the point that everyone's got a mobile version of it. It's like, hey, here's a thing in your neck. The moment it registers, it completely wipes your memory. It's on demand. I wonder, is it kind of like Blind Spot? Because, it's a drug in Blind Spot that wiped Jane's memory. So I wonder, is that what that thing is? Like, I wonder, is there some kind of, like, solution or something inside of it that hits your brain and erases your memory? Or does it, like, affects certain like synapses of like, oh, it shuts down this synapses that are like tied to memory or something. We haven't really gotten into the nitty gritty of like how the science works in that regard, or rather the science fiction of it all, how that works. Because that's, once again, like, is it like a complete erasure? That's where I feel like it has to be like maybe a drug or something like that. Maybe it's the same thing of like it like in puts all these chemicals in your brain that attacks these certain synapses and certain parts of your brain that store memory and completely wipes it, or is it just there and it's just severely blocked? Because in Jane's case, it's like, oh, the memories are there, they're just like severely buried, you know? Either way, putting that tangent aside and getting back to the point, Mason's the one that kind of pushing to authorize this. Even Grace isn't down for it. The only people that knew at this point was like Grace and Carter, and Mason was going to handle this on his own. He's like, I'm the one to put in the order. That way it doesn't fall back on Grace. If anything happens, it'll fall back on him. But the thing is, he doesn't have authorization from higher command to do this, so he'd be doing it on his own. So even to the point, if the command found out about it, he'd have to go on the run. But he's the one that gave Celeste her new identity as Abby, even picked the house that they currently live in together. Even him saying, like, if he went on a run, he could enjoy, like, you know, this type of house, the cool breeze. And Carter's like, oh, you wouldn't last 5 months. It's like, 5 days and 5 minutes or something like that. And it's like, oh, lo and behold, we don't know when him and Abby met. Their daughter's got to be at least 8 or something like that. Hendrix has to be maybe at least 8. So, or 7 or so. So, like, he's been doing it for, like, they've been living in that house for at least a couple years, especially if she's been living there for at least 1 to 2-ish years. So, either way, it's a very just, hey, we're doing this very shady thing, but we also can never let Nadia know. Nadia's under the impression we're just relocating her to Oregon, keeping her hidden from Davik. So that makes me wonder, does maybe even currently, even before getting her memories wiped, maybe Nadia still... So now it is that thing of, when that statement of, I lied to you, it might be a thing of Nadia's got something to lie about all of this, we'll get to in a second. Whatever that, this might all tie into that big secret that she had kept from Mason. Something that he could never know. But also, when he said, I lied to you too, it's because they both thought they were about to die. And it's like, this is kind of a bad situation. So they wanted to be honest with each other. I, at the time, was like, oh, it's got to be about the fact that you really care about each other. And you've kind of... Well, because who knows, like, whether or not... Maybe that was just them doing their professional thing, but we don't know what thing... By the time that beginning mission, when they first encountered Manticore at the beginning of the series 8 years ago, we have no idea what's happened to them in that 2-year frame, whether or not, like, like from 10 years ago to 8 years ago, we don't know in that 2-year frame, like, what might have happened between them. So there might have been some bad blood. They might not have been on the best of terms, the way they were talking with each other. It was very flirty, but it also would probably be a thing of, like, no, what we got is good, but at the end of the day, we're still spies, so we're keeping it very, like... cool, especially knowing what Mason knew at the time. So it's like, it made that complicated. So once again, I don't know where their relationship was. We'll probably eventually circle to that and find out, like, what happened in that 2-year period and where they stood at before that Manticore mission. But because Mason did get a message, and I thought it was kind of doubling down on being like, yes, it was in fact Celeste who did this. But in actuality, it turns out, at least Carter says, it's not you, present day. He's like, no, I'm not talking to you, it's her. This is all her fault. And pointing to Nadia. Because Bernard was warning Mason not to really go through with this. Because Mason not only wanted to take Celeste's memory, he also wanted to destroy the vials so she'd never get them back. But Bernard was like, you might want to be careful doing that. Because backstopping her is one thing, but destroying her vials so she can never get her memories back, ironically enough, he's in that same circumstance right now. That's why I was like, is there actually only a one... once again, this was like early days, so they might not have had, like, the backups like they might have now. Once again, technology advances pretty quickly, especially in this regard, so we have no idea how far that technology had advanced in 2 years, and even more so in these 8 years, but probably really don't have the time to really fully work on it in these past 8 years, considering you're supposed to be dead and low-key after Manticore dismantled Citadel and burned it to the ground. So But at the end, Carter like had, 10 years ago was like, I seen you. I know you enough. I've known you for like the past decade. You've been off this entire day. It's because you've been really pushing this Celeste thing because you know the real person who authorized it, who sent a message through this back channel that it was actually Nadia who took the Oz key. Now, once again, why she would do that? Maybe she has some other allegiances besides Citadel. Maybe it's a personal thing. Who knows what it is? But the reason why he pushed to get Celeste's memories wiped is because Celeste could be the only one to prove that it was Nadia. She does know Nadia enough to probably be able to, like, be a threat to Nadia, so that's why you had to wipe her memory. So protecting the woman you love, but it also about the fact is that she might be a mole, so you need to keep her in play long enough, I guess, to verify it for yourself whether or not she is. It makes you wonder at what, well, because the message was vague, but we don't know if Mason already had some inkling and that message he received, because we don't know who it's from, like solidify that. It was like, not, because I was about to say, not unless it was from Celeste who sent him that message and he figured out she's the one that sent him the message, and that's why he had to be like, no, I have to get rid of her before she exposes Nadia. I don't know. Like, who, we still don't know who, and I don't think that makes sense, so it feels like it's got to be someone else. I just don't know who. But once again, if that's the case, then either something happened in that 2 years to make him realize, like, oh, maybe she's not the mole I thought she was. Or while they were on that train, that was doubly why he was there, not just to back her up, but because he believed she was a mole, and this could have been an opportunity to kind of like expose her, to find out fully from himself. Who knows? Maybe there was stuff over those 2 years that made him go like, no, I've solidified she is a mole, and I was sent here. I don't know. I mean, that's also the thing. Like, why would Bernard kind of ask you, well, because he was under the impression Nadia was dead. He doesn't know Nadia is still in play. And he's like, yeah, I kept a lot from you, so I probably don't want to tell you that this agent you used to work with actually was a traitor. So, I mean, maybe even Bernard didn't know. Maybe the only people who were in the know is because Carter figured it out and Mason told him not to ever say it again. So no one else in Citadel might have ever known. Not Bernard, not Grace. So... And the episode ends with us coming back to present day, being like, right, I wasn't talking to you, Mason. It's Nadia I'm talking to. It's all her fault that this all happened. So it's definitely going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this takes us, what we ultimately get revealed, like what Nadia is going to do. I mean, Kyle is already in a position where he doesn't really fully trust her, especially after last episode being like, oh yeah, she's the one that kind of betrayed Citadel. It might have been about the Oz key, but maybe she's not the one that sold them out to Manticore. Who knows? Like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm excited to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.